Welcome back to this fantasy genre deep dive. I'm so excited for this video. We already talked about the subgenres of fantasy. We talked about the history of fantasy literature, and last week I started the first video in the series where I talk about the magic systems, and last week we discussed soft magic systems. And just as a short summary, what are magic systems? So magic systems are basically about how the magic works in your story. And depending on which system you choose, it will have different implications on your story. So questions are usually like, what are your rules and limitations? How is magic learned or accessed? How does magic influence your story? How does it affect your characters? Development and interactions and things like that. And well, if you haven't guessed from the title, today it's kind of obvious. We're talking about hard magic systems since we talked about soft magic systems last week. And I think it's definitely interesting to look at the differences between those two. So whereas magic in soft magic systems is more loosely defined, with few or no explanations of the rules or limitations, and it has more of a vague setting. Hard magic systems, on the other hand, have often well-defined rules and limitations, and the mechanics of it are like explained in detail, and there are like clear costs and consequences to using it. For example, soft magic can be found in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit series, where we don't really know about how it came to existence, how it is used, the extent of things, or like the price of it. Another example is the Song of Ice and Fire, where we also don't really get that much information, and it's not like the primary thing of the whole series, at least until I watched, which is like the first 4 seasons. Another example is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, which is not only an anime movie, but also a book. And the magic that is used by Howl and others in the book is more like whimsical, unpredictable, with like little explanation of how spells are like cast or maintained and stuff. So these are kind of like soft magic examples. Other differences between the two systems are that in hard magic systems, often magic is more predictable, whereas in soft magic systems, it's more unpredictable. In hard magic systems, characters often can solve problems using their magic because they and the readers like understand the limitations and the capabilities much better. And in soft magic systems, it's less about solving problems through magic, hopefully, so if it's a good book, but more about creating wonder and serving as like atmosphere. And hard magic systems tend to be more explained to the reader in detail, hopefully not in too much detail, whereas in soft magic systems, explanations are very minimal or like entirely absent. In hard magic systems, it often plays a central role in the plot's progression, whereas in soft magic, it's, as I already said, typically more atmospheric and really adds like depth to the world rather than being more like central to the mechanics of the plot, And hard magic systems really allow for such vast possibilities in writing and has a lot of advantages, which I will get into right now. So it really provides clarity when writing because you just have your whole system set, you know what are the rules, you know your spells, you know your limitations and costs, and that can be more easy to follow when you're writing. It also can help you to avoid inconsistencies. Obviously, it's not like a remedy to it, but it's easier to avoid them in comparison to soft magic systems, where it's more like vaguey, woohoo. Another advantage is that magic feels less like a plot server, and readers can get much more in the story because they know what's it about. They know also the costs when there are costs included. It feels easier to create the systems where most readers won't go like, was it just for the plot? Another pro is that you can write like really cool strategy and like tactical elements, so you can really use your character's abilities to your advantage to create like really cool scenes and to become really innovative and really creative to like serve certain problems with like a specific combination of a spell or just something. And it's really interesting because you can still keep the stakes high and force your characters to like figure it out within the realm of what's possible in your magic system world. Okay, so these were kind of like really the positive aspects of this system. There are also disadvantages, like that you are tied to these rules and limitations. Of course, there's always wiggle room, there's always loopholes, but you have to kind of make sure that it really doesn't seem like you've just taken the lazy route and we're like, oh, well, like I didn't introduce it for the first 10 books, but now it's possible. Another disadvantage, also obviously depends on the person, but you have to become really like inventive when you have certain problems that seem kind of unsolvable to the reader, and you have to then avoid make that mistake where you give vague explanations as to why it was not possible to solve that problem. Like, I personally love it when there's like a problem in a story and I'm like, holy shit, how are they going to get out of this? And then they find such a cool strategic way or such a cool solution. But it can be also kind of hard to figure that out in the moment on how you kind of want to do that. So that can be like something you have to think about more. Another big contra is that hard magic can often become overly complicated, which can confuse the reader, which is obviously something you don't really want. Like, it is really cool. Probably what you've built is probably really cool and you want your readers to know about it. But if you're just throwing words at the reader, like terms and terms and terms, it will just confuse them. It will be too complex and complicated, and there won't be much fun to reading it because you're like thrown into this world that obviously you've concocted everything. Like, you have your gigantic chart with every explanation and you're like, makes sense. But the readers don't have that, so you have to find a good balance within that. So that's also something I often personally criticize from books, but also read criticism about, that it's just too complicated. There are like too many spells, you can't keep up, and you just can't really get into the story because you don't understand what's going on. Let's get into some examples of what hard magic system can look like. Where can we find hard magic systems? A really good example is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. And the magic system, which is allomancy, is like based on the consumption of metals with like specific powers associated with each metal. And there are clear like rules governing their use. So there we can really like see how he used like rules and limitations and how things are tied to each other. Other examples are The Magicians by Lev Grossman, where magic is treated as a scientific discipline, more or less, requiring precise knowledge, concentration, and study with like clearly defined rules on how the spells work and the consequences of failing to cast them correctly. And the whole consequence thing is a big thing that people talk about because it just adds stakes and it makes your story so exciting. Another example is the Powder Mage trilogy by Brian McClellan. The magic system is really broken into different types, which is also often a reoccurring theme. For example, there are powder mages who use their gunpowder to enhance their abilities, and each type kind of follows strict physical rules, and this makes magic more of a tactical resource than an like unknown force. Another example is the Bartimaeus trilogy, which I can recommend, by Jonathan Stroud, and where magic is really like summoning based, with a clear hierarchy of spirits that magicians control through precise rituals, incantation, and binding symbols, which really creates this like consequence-driven system. So yeah, we can already see kind of the things that make hard magic systems. Another example I wanted to talk about is the Inheritance trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. It is generally praised by most readers, but there's also a lot of discourse on people that find the magic system confusing because it's quite complex and often like this large number of rules that is introduced without much clear context. So that was kind of criticized on that magic system. I also found this really interesting take from the author on this whole magic thing. So, quote, "There's all these rules I'm supposed to follow, or the fantasy police might come and make me do hard labor in the cold iron mines. It has to be logical. This is magic we're talking about here, right? Force of nature, kind of woo-woo and frou-frou things beyond our ken and all that. And most of all, not science. This is magic we're talking about. It's supposed to go places science can't. Defy logic, wink at technology, fill us all with the sense of wonder that comes of gazing upon a fictional world and seeing something truly different from our own." I think it also depends on what you like to read. I agree in the sense that fantasy is a genre of immersion, and it is about getting lost in the magic and setting aside your logical beliefs and making things possible that wouldn't be possible with our science. And if that's like a big hyper problem for you, then maybe like fantasy is just not the right genre for you. Then you should go more into science fiction instead. But I think what she's also more talking about is this whole soft magic system. And there are a lot of people that like reading soft magic. So that's definitely not like the problem. And I mean, I already talked about this in the soft magic system video, so go watch that. But I'm of the opinion that even in the whole impossible realm, you can still have logic behind things, and I think there should also be some logic behind things. If the way you write magic like always causes readers to pause their book and be confused and be like, wait, but like 2 pages ago you said something that would make me think that what is happening right now is not possible. And I don't know, I think it's a kind of something you should strive for as an author, that your readers don't constantly pause your book and are like, huh? What? So all these systems are also just for your help. This is not to tie you down to something. I mean, this is writing we're talking about. Like, this is the best thing because you can kind of do what you want. But if you're going into this direction where your readers can read out clear rules and clear spells, or like a clear thing how magic is about, and then you randomly start to jumble it up, add things that never were there, or just do like a Deux Ex Machina style things that constantly pull out your readers, then I think it is a little bit of lazy writing and just not, you haven't really given it good thought. And I believe that the critique, or at least what I believe is the critique about, often comes not from like, actually in like page 50, line 10, you didn't go into excruciating detail on why exactly that spell was possible and where it came from and blah blah blah. Like, yeah, no one wants that. And I think magic can be fun and woo-woo and should be fun and woo-woo. But I also think that it can be woo-woo and still have like rules and like fit into this hard magic system style. And yeah, I think in the end it just comes down to like what we enjoy reading. And yeah, you should just read what you like reading, and if the soft magic system is not for you, then you can go for hard magic systems instead. I think even if you have like a clear structure for your magic, it's still like impossible. Like, even if you have like, oh, I have this stick here where I can create fire or something, I can't do that. Science can't explain that. So it's still magic, but only because there's some rule tied to it. I think, honestly, for me, it doesn't really destroy it. But I agree with her that there is like this fantasy police there where I'm like, is that necessary? But yeah, I also think, of course, you also write for yourself, but your like the readers, they pay to read your book, and they also want to kind of get a good, consistent book that is like where you're like, okay, well, the author actually thought about how they wanted to do something. Okay, just to kind of follow this up, I already talked a little bit about readers' opinion on this, but I still want to include a little bit of like what people love, what do they hate. Like I kind of rummaged through forums to get like maybe a short summary for you to know what people love and what they hate. So people like consistency and logic in hard magic systems. They like clarity that creates good immersion. They also really like strategic conflicts that are solved with cleverness and knowledge. I definitely agree to this. I also love this so much. What they don't really like is over explanations, too much detail, too much complex terms that don't really get explained, and also predictability. I think this is, when we compare it to soft magic systems, it is definitely more predictable, because if you tell someone that they can do a certain spell, it's kind of predictable that they can do that spell, but it also doesn't mean that you can't include unpredictable things in your story, and you should definitely do that, because unpredictability just creates cool scenes and exciting scenes. And kind of the consensus on what they want to see more in high fantasy is just like a balanced complexity. I think this will be also something reoccurring, that people just want a good balance between things, like have a well explained system but also leave room for surprise and mystery, you know? Okay, now we know everything about hard magic systems. What's it about? What's the difference between soft magic systems? What do readers love and hate? So let's get a little bit into how you can create one. This is, I don't know, this is like my favorite section. I love talking about this and kind of gather all these tips and tricks. I think sometimes, because I have like a gigantic Pinterest board with just book writing tips, and it can be like a lot to remember all of them. So I really love to like put them all a little bit like together and give you my kind of take on this. Okay, so how would I start this? First, I think you should have some type of general idea of how your story looks like, or how your magic looks like, and how they kind of fit together. You have like a few scenes already in your mind, and I think there are kind of like two ways to go with this. Please add in the comments if you also have some other kind of approaches. So either figure out your magic first and get like a list together and answer all the questions and points, kind of like you're interviewing your magic, so you understand how it works from the inside and out. There are a lot of good like lists with a lot of questions on like, how does your magic work? Is it inherited, or is it given through some kind of ritual, or where is it coming from? What are your limitations? What are your extents of the power? And so let's kind of get through a list together. This is also kind of what I did with my magic, kind of answer these questions. It's kind of actually like doing an interview, and basically like you would do any other like character chart, just with your magic. Okay, so to just show you kind of an example how I did it, I have like a specific section for how the magic works in my kind of world. I actually made a lot of changes recently, so a lot of it is not up to date, but so I have questions like how magic fits into the world and the story, what role it will play in the plot, what kind of different branches and types of magic there are, what kind of limitations, boundaries, also what can magic do and its abilities, blah blah. Then where does magic come from, like genetics or objects or training. Then what is the price of magic, like what do you have to sacrifice, what is the growth of magic, can they improve their abilities with time or practice. Also with culture, like how does it impact the society, the politics, or conflict, or something like that. Then also aesthetics, which is honestly the most fun one. And as you can see, I also have like a lot of unfinished questions. And these are kind of like, it's a big section on just the magic. it really helps to also find more scenes for your story, because you like start thinking about it, and then it also kind of goes in your like unconsciousness, and it thinks about and like ponders and makes like cool ideas. And I love it when I'm like just randomly doing something like cooking, and then I'm like, oh, I know how I want to do that in my magic system. So yeah, I already talked about this in the last video, but I kind of like to imagine myself as if I was in a convention, and like people had all these like questions like, oh, how did the character manage to do that, or like why was that possible? And I just imagine, okay, what would I answer in that moment? And yeah, like obviously I think it's still important to not lose like side of it and become obsessed with like a million details and rules, and be like, okay, but what if they ask me about page 50 line 2? Because then you will just never write and like only obsess about all of these rules and try to like make everything perfect, which is also not possible. But yeah, I think also a good reminder is that readers often read over a lot of stuff, and to also kind of avoid spending too much time on details, what I also like to do is write in brackets. Like, for example, if you have a system with spells where they use spells and it's like something you use over and over again, I would just write in brackets, oh, insert name of spell that turns on the light, for example. And then at the end of the writing session, I either mark it for the next day and just let my unconsciousness ponder about it.
Hey, you can always just disintegrate me with water.
Or I just sit down for like one session where I solve these things, and I go back to what I wrote and what I wrote in these brackets, and think about a certain spell name or something. And this kind of like helps me to not get too obsessed with like details, and you don't have to have everything figured out. So that is also why it's so good to remind yourself that your first draft is your first draft, and it's only for you. You can write the most random comments in that, and you don't have to have everything figured out. And adding to that, you can always like come back and change the name. Like, you could finish your book and then be like, I don't really like the name of my main character anymore, and change that, you know? So yeah, it obviously depends on the kind of magic that you're using, on how much you kind of need to figure out these details up front. But so there are a lot of lists out there, and there will be one that kind of fits your thing, and you can always change these lists. Like, I just copy and pasted a list, and I was like, okay, I'm going to choose these questions because others were not really fitting for my system or something. So yeah, these are always only like guidelines, you know? But I would definitely try to answer as many questions as possible about your magic. The more you know it, the easier it is also for you to write it. And when you're writing, it's much smoother, because it just comes natural to you. You know what I mean? And so that was kind of one of the approaches I thought about. The other one is writing down ideas on your story first, like just all the scenes in your head. Maybe you already have like a really epic fighting scene in your head, like where they kind of like use magic, and you kind of see, I don't know, like red flames exploding and floating and making shields or something. So you write all these down, and then look at all the scenes where kind of magic is included, and then from these scenes try to draw out conclusions or like implications of what that says about your magic system, and try to find limitations within these scenes where, like, okay, they chose this spell or this magic, but I also had other magic in mind. Why did they do that? And just try to use those scenes to find these rules and then extend them. Also, like, recheck your other scenes and see if with the rules and limitations or guidelines or whatever you figured out, if that kind of makes sense with your other scenes. And this creates these really, really cool scenes where readers are like, oh my god, how are they going to solve this? Like, the obvious solution is not possible. Like, shit, what are they going to do? And then you can come back with your like awesome scene and be like, boom, there's a fucking loophole they found, and it creates these really cool scenes that I personally also really love. But so I think this is the last approach is more like a way to figure out the general gist of your magic without spending too much time in the beginning, going crazy because you don't really know yet how it's supposed to work. And this way you can kind of surround that. Okay, then I thought about, what if you don't have any idea in mind and you also think like, okay, everything has kind of been done before, like how am I supposed to find like something new? And because I definitely have thought that, and I think often we look too much at the big picture. Like we're like, okay, I have to create something that is like this crazy cool like new Harry Potter or the new Lord of the Rings, but you don't have to create any, like you don't have to recreate anything. And there are so many cool ways you can create something unique, and you don't have to have this crazy world to have a good book. It's also okay to like focus on a really specific tiny thing that becomes your magic that can also be really cool. But what I mean with the specific ideas is, it came to mind when I watched a video of a creator where he talked about his book, and I was like, okay, I really haven't thought into that direction, because I also often think too much in this like bigger sense. But in his book, the people that use magic, they can connect themselves to like fires once they have created a bond with it, and then they can kind of control it. And I can't really remember what, like I think it's tied to his blood or something, so he can't really use it too much. And he also has to create like a bond to a specific fire. And at first I was like, that's like really specific and like kind of really limits yourself. But the more he talked about it, the more I got like really cool scenes in my head. And I thought, this is such a cool idea. Like it's a really specific idea, but in that sense, it also creates a really cool, unique, and exciting story. And so, kind of, my advice is to also consider smaller ideas, because you can even take the smallest idea and make that into a grand story and into a grand magic system and into a really, really cool world. So, how do you find these ideas if you don't have anything? Like, I think I understand that it can be quite difficult to find these. It's definitely also difficult for me to find like really unique things, because I think it's impossible to not be influenced by everything around you. So I definitely also have to like think more in depth about that. But I daydream a lot. A lot of ideas just come to me. Like they're just there. You know what I mean? Like I listen to a song and suddenly I have like a 10 book series in my head. And but that is like really, that's kind of like a shitty tip. Like I don't know how to teach that, you know? But for some people, maybe they don't have that, which is obviously no one's fault. Like, so I kind of want to put a greater emphasis on this thing, because I definitely understand how it can be difficult to come up with ideas. And I think there are a lot of people that are really good writers and just need like this starter of an idea, you know? Okay, so here are a few tips and idea starters. So number one is kind of maybe looking at specific elements of a world and think about how you can turn them into magic. I mean, obviously we have the classic ones like fire, water, air, earth, but there are also other really cool elements like shadows or light, or I don't know, clouds or plants or candles, I don't know. And then take that single element and explore how it can be like manipulated in a unique way. For example, think about how water could be linked to emotions or to the soul, or they are maybe linked to like a physical object. Another way to find ideas, kind of to take cultural or historical inspirations and try to maybe look into like lesser known myth or folklore or like historical practices, because I mean, we know like the classic ones already, but there's so much folklore we don't really talk about too much. So I think there's a great deal of things out there you can kind of draw inspiration from. And for example, like adapt an old ritual or like an old practice, and that can really provide a fresh take on a magical concept, obviously staying respectful to things. Another approach to find your magic idea is to kind of reverse engineer existing concepts. So start with the outcome of a certain magic you know about, and then kind of work backwards and think about a different take on how that outcome could have been created. Think about how the source of the magic is kind of different. So think about like an interesting outcome or like an effect you would really like to see in your world, and then backtrack to figure out what kind of magic could cause that. So if like a character can communicate with animals, like what would be specific limitations or requirements for this ability? Maybe they can only like communicate with animals that are like native to their birthplace or something. So you can also try to alter like existing systems and take a common magic system and impose like really strict limitations on them or like unique twists. I really like reading similar or like overlapping concepts but with like unique twists to them. So I think often we are like too pressured to always create something entirely new, but I think it's also okay to already take existing systems and just find your own unique ways of incorporating that. Another approach is to merge unrelated concepts. So kind of blend two really unrelated ideas together, something that usually wouldn't go together, and then try a way to combine them. I think this is also a board game where you take random events and then try to find like a conspiracy theory to tie them together. And this is kind of the same way, for example, combining music with healing magic, where like specific melodies can heal wounds, but only if it's sung or played in the correct way. Or for example, if you play it in with a wrong key, it maybe harms another person. Another way in this whole like merging concepts is also using like real world mechanics in your fantasy, like incorporate a real scientific principle into your magic system and try to kind of tie it to some magic. I mean, just, I don't know, look at certain physics magazines and like find a really cool way to include that. Another approach is to set really clear boundaries first. So maybe you have like certain limitations or costs that could create really cool scenes or really cool obstacles. So try to find like really high costs for using magic, which can make the most simplest abilities really unique and rare. And so for example, a magic user might be able to heal people, but it only works if they take on a certain injury on themselves, or using magic hurts their soulmate, or every time they use magic they have to go on this crazy dangerous quest to bring a certain fruit back to the person that grants them the power or something like that. Another approach is to draw inspiration from the mundane, so look at everyday objects or everyday actions and try to find magic in those things by taking something ordinary and then giving that like a fantastical twist. Can be anything, like you could probably make something out of like an apple or something. Doing these things creates these like really unique magic systems where people are like, oh damn, have never thought about that, and it can create cool stories, I think. For example, like a character's magic is maybe linked to sewing, so they can stitch, I don't know, physical or magical objects together, or memories of a person, or maybe like timelines or something. Another thing in that kind of realm is try to expand like daily tasks, like consider how magic could like enhance or alter like a simple daily task. For example, a baker's magic can make bread that gives temporary abilities like strength or speed to those who eat it. Like if you know the Bliss Bakery series, which I highly recommend. I loved that when I was like a teenager reading that. Or maybe like something that would help you do your laundry or something. And then you have already an idea in how your head, and then you can expand on that, on what that means for the person, and then you can try to find other ways to incorporate that in your story. Another approach is to utilize like problem solving scenarios. So think of magic as a solution. Like maybe there's a really big problem in your fantasy world, and the people that live in there, yeah, try to find a way to solve that, but obviously with its drawbacks. So for example, if it's like a world where it's constantly dark, like engulfed in darkness, the characters develop like a magic that creates light, but it requires a part of their own life force like each time it's used, because this is often how inventions are created, because we have a problem and then someone tries a way to solve it. And I think this is also a really nice way when you're, for example, creating a ritual or something, to think about the first people that created the ritual out of like need or urgency or some kind of problem. And that kind of helps to explain, okay, why did they burn the leaf right now, and why did they have to go 3 times into one direction or something. And it can be really cool to go more into the problem solving thing, or maybe you can even look at problems from our current world and then find like a magic way to solve that and incorporate that in your story. And as a last approach, maybe experiment with social or ethical implications. So create magic that maybe has social consequences, like a magic system that directly affects social structures or ethics or politics. I think it's also a cool way to create like catharsis in your books and answer certain ethical questions. For example, a world where magic is tied to like a social status, and those with more power can influence laws or even reality, but at the risk of like societal collapse if it is abused. So creating certain consequences for them using or abusing their magic. And I think this is a really cool kind of approach to find unique magic or create unique magic systems, things. Another part of this is like making moral dilemmas. So like designing a magic system that forces characters to make difficult ethical choices. Like a character can bring the dead back to life, but doing that erases like another person's existence. Finding these switch ups and having these moral dilemmas. And I think that is actually a really cool starter to create unique stories and unique magic systems. Yeah. So I really hope that maybe there was something in there that could help you to spark inspiration or spark an idea if you're having a little bit of trouble in that. And yeah, I think it's really good to have these kind of approaches to find more like uniquer ideas. So if you kind of want to get a little bit into hard magic systems and you want to read a few books on those to kind of get a better feeling of how people write them. I already talked about the examples in the beginning, so you can definitely check these out as well. But I can also recommend all the books from like Leigh Bardugo on the Grishaverse, like Six of Croes or Shadow and Bones. And I really like these books because she really used this whole like tactical and strategy thing of using magic, and she has this classification of these different types of magic users. Like we have copararchy, etherarchy, and matriarchy. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. That's always the thing with books, you don't never know, like Hermione who I also like, it can be, okay, truth be told, it can be sometimes confusing in the beginning because there are a lot of terms and you're like, what is that? But she solves these things throughout the story, and in my opinion, she incorporates these explanations in really good and natural ways, so it doesn't feel like you get like this explanation in the beginning like, so this is how my magic system works. It's more like really nicely incorporated, and you just get a feeling through on all the things throughout the story. And yeah, so that's kind of the book that I recommend reading, and that's what I kind of recommend. What do readers recommend? I kind of found that people agreed that Bartimaeus from Jonathan Stroud was a good way to start with this. I already talked a little bit about why it is kind of in this hard magic systems we are given like hard and fast rules in the first chapter, and they're also like reiterated throughout the story, and like also expanded upon in like footnotes. And there are limitations to the power. There's also like classes of the spirits inside the book, and what the magic can do, what can control them, and things like that. And I think it's a really nice, cool series that is a really good depiction of the hard magic system. So now you already have like 2 books you can start on reading and get a feeling for this. But yeah, I already hope that I could give you like a really in-depth explanation on what the hard magic system is about, how you can write it, what are kind of like certain approaches I take on or certain tips. And it's a really cool magic system. I really enjoy reading hard magic system. And yeah, I really hope I could give you some new information and some new tips. If I missed anything, like please write that in the comments. Like, I love reading about tips and tricks, and there are so many different experiences on writing, and I feel like everyone has like kind of their few cents to add that are really helpful and really valuable. So yeah, and if you have any questions, please also feel free to put those in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video and if you want to, you can give it a like and subscribe to my channel if you don't want to miss out on any further videos in this playlist or just on books or the movie genre in general. Yeah, thank you so much for watching this video and taking your time. Really love and appreciate that, and see you next time. Bye bye. Like draw out implications. And that creates that things of like a problem in our current world, which there's a lot to choose from. Social or ethical why can't I say implications? Everything we talked about a lot. Okay, I'm going to cry from my throat. Yeah,